Hey, what's up? It's Derek Martin from CodeOpinion.com, and I'm here to remind you that your customers do not care at all how your app is built. They don't care about the programming language, tooling, libraries, frameworks, or whatever you're using. They don't care. They care about the value that it provides to them and certain characteristics. They just want it to work. And of course, there's nuance to this. Imagine that. Context matters. As an example, if your customers are developers, then they likely do care. And this video is inspired by this wonderful tweet is, if you want to know why an app needs JavaScript on the client and can't just do it all on the server, just look at Hey or any other Hotwire app, where it's simulating a slow connection. It's clicking on the plus icon there to add a new entry to your calendar, and it's just kind of showing how long it takes to actually render it. So does every app need JavaScript? Well, before I get to that, I'd like to thank EventStore for sponsoring this video. EventStoreDB is a new category of operational database built for event sourcing, CQRS, and event-driven microservices. For more on EventStoreDB, check out the link in the description. So to just quickly explain why it was slow is you're simulating a slow internet connection in the browser, and it's because they're actually making a round trip, Hague's making a round trip to the server to get the HTML, and that's being shipped down to the browser to actually be rendered in that little dialog. And it's not that the server was slow, it could be rendering that HTML, returning it very, very quickly. The issue is that you're adding latency by having to make that network call to get the HTML in the first place. And that's really what I think the point of the tweet was saying, if you're using JavaScript in the client, you wouldn't actually even have to add that latency by making a network call. You would just render it with JavaScript. So it's not that your app needs JavaScript and it can't just all be on the server. Really, a more fair criticism is that you shouldn't be making unnecessary network calls that are gonna add latency. But what I really find hilarious in our industry is there are at times, one, to just completely ignore this, which is the fallacies of distributed computing, because we're often in distributed environments where we choose to kind of acknowledge it and then in other times don't. So I'm not even gonna scroll, just the first three. The network is reliable, latency is 0, and bandwidth is infinite. So what that tweet was really getting down to is that don't need to make that network call because the latency isn't 0. But then why is it that the entire industry for the last 10 years, kind of the de facto implementation of microservices, has been request response over HTTP from service to service to service? So are we acknowledging this or are we not acknowledging this? Now, I mentioned at the very beginning that I don't think your customers care at all how you build your app. What programming language, tooling, library, etc., they don't care. They just want it to provide value. Now, you could have your customers that are developers or IT-focused decision makers. Then maybe they do care. But if we're talking about somebody like Hey, or you're writing an EMR, or you're writing some warehouse app, do they actually care, your end users, how it's built? No, somebody's not going to go look at Hey that doesn't really have a tech background and say, oh, you know what, I can't use that because that's Ruby on Rails behind the scenes and I just can't do that. I don't like that. No, they don't even know what Ruby on Rails is. They want an email calendar app that's suiting their needs. That's however the characteristics that they like. So does every app need JavaScript? No, it actually just needs to not make useless network calls that are going to add latency. We needed to optimize and it was very little. This is live. Modal's preloaded, stays stored and resets. Problem solved. And for some more fun, to all my founder friends, Ryanair is proof that your product can be garbage, but just good enough to provide baseline value and still be one of the most profitable companies in the world in its league. Done is better than perfect. And then I'll continue on. There was a retweet of this. And this, again, I think a lot of this just missing context and nuance, which is Remix tagline is build better websites. But this week's discourse shows that almost none of you actually care if your work is garbage, as long as it got a couple of guys Lambos and you get a paycheck. My motivation is lower than ever. Web sucks and you're proud of it. Now, I think this is pure nonsense. First, because I don't think people are okay with producing garbage. I think people are trying to do the best they can. Given the information and knowledge they have, they're trying to make the best decision they can within that confines of those constraints. Generally, I think that. There's also the mention there of like Lambos and monetary thing of like, that's fine then to make these garbage decisions. I've never mentioned anything monetary. I keep saying value. And that's, to me, you could be developing a free product that you're trying to produce value to people. Open source is a lot of this. You're producing value for people. There's no monetary gain from it directly. And that's completely different. I think this just lacks so much context or in other insights of different ways about how you're making decisions. And I think a great response from this in his context from Aaron Francis is, my primary responsibility is to provide for my family. This is his context, what he thinks. So I have to choose between a paycheck and whatever y'all decide is great UX. I'm going to choose a paycheck every single time. I'm intrinsically motivated to do great work, and I believe it's a moral mandate for me. Context, me, him. If I make something y'all deem as garbage, then one of the few things could be true. There's a constraint that you don't know about. Imagine that's what I'm talking about. There's a skill issue. Could just be ignorance. You're unaware. It's based on your knowledge. I have bad taste. I have different tastes. I made a mistake. And to add some more nuance, do you have paying customers? Did any of those customers make a choice based on client-side JavaScript versus server-side rendering? Maybe one day you'll be responsible for the P&L and realize how irrelevant all these arguments are. And I want to touch on that last point because it provides more insight, a whole different way of looking at things that gives you more information for the decisions that you're going to make. If you can see the top line and the bottom line and you manage those, then absolutely it affects your decision making. My best example of this, if you just become, and if you've only ever worked for a company, and then all of a sudden you become an independent contractor or you start your own company, you will have a whole different worldview than what you did before. And it's a good thing because you can see more perspective. You can start to understand, even then if you go back and work for a company, all the other things that you're not seeing that are forcing and kind of giving constraints and making decisions upon. As I always say, context is king because it helps you win your decision making. But as well as when you're trying to think when somebody else made a decision and you're trying to understand why, it's really hard if you're only living in your little worldview, your little bubble, to understand all the constraints, all the trade-offs that somebody else made because you're not living in their context. And all of this started because the slow rendering of a pop-up. Could client-side JavaScript fix this issue? Sure, absolutely. But they fixed it without even needing to do that. It was simply not making the network call and preloading it. That solved the issue. This just goes back to the fallacies of distributed computing and thinking that the network call is free when it's not. Can you build an app that people use and find value in that some parts people deem as garbage? Absolutely. Can you build an app that has absolutely nothing garbage in it, that's technical perfection that nobody uses because it provides absolutely no value? Yes. In a lot of business systems, the real value is in capturing workflows and streamlining that. So I mentioned characteristics, and kind of speed and performance is one of those things. And as developers, we think about what we were alluding to earlier is how quickly stuff renders, latency. But a lot of speed is actually in those workflows and how quickly an end user can actually navigate and perform their workflows. That even provides more value about how quickly they can do something that has some type of business process and some type of workflow in their system. So in this video, I really lived up to my Code Opinion title. I just think sometimes when I see these things, you just gotta take a little bit of a step back and kind of take a bigger view of what we're actually dealing with here. If you enjoy videos like this, make sure to let me know in the comments. If you wanna chat with other software developers about topics like this, you can join my private Discord server and get access. Check the link in the description on how to join. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, make sure to leave a comment. And please subscribe for more videos on software architecture and design. Thanks.